Welcome and thanks for joining us today. Presenting today's CyLab seminar is Greg Shannon, and Greg is the Chief Scientist for the CERT Division at Carnegie Mellon's Software Engineering Institute, a federally funded research and development center. He works to expand the division's research results, impact, and visibility. Outside of CERT, he works to influence national and international research agendas by promoting data-driven science for cybersecurity. Greg is the chair of IEEE's Cybersecurity Initiative, which is the subject of his talk, titled the IEEE Security Initiative, Accelerating Innovation in Security and Privacy Technologies. So let's all welcome Greg and thank him for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. So this is live? Okay, good. So with the President's Summit 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, cybersecurity, privacy are hot topics. And the question really is, what can a professional society do to address the challenges there? Especially when the challenges aren't limited to just one country. They're global, and they affect us at multiple levels, the individual, the corporate level, as well as national security levels. So that's really what this initiative is about, is to leverage IEEE's resources and long-standing work in this area to move forward on that. Many of you have seen this slide before, this cartoon before that I've used. It's the challenge that software engineers face on a daily basis. Security engineers, privacy engineers, take your pick. Good solutions seem to have limited returns, and the value proposition isn't quite there. I think based on the intrusions that we've seen over the last couple of months, I think that equation is starting to change. But on the one hand, that's good that people start paying more attention as these decisions are made. But on the other hand, it still calls us out as technologists as to how can we provide more efficient, more effective security and privacy technologies, that will actually get used. So a big part of innovation, from my point of view, is not only the creation of the innovative idea, but it's actually, an innovation really doesn't mean much unless people really use it. And I think that's a real challenge for a lot of the security technologies that we have. They exist, but yet for some reason we haven't figured out how to really help society adopt them. So that's part of our challenge here. So the goal here is, there's plenty of good innovation going on, but the goal here is to accelerate that. What can we do to get ideas created better, faster, and get them out and used faster? And then one of my perspectives on this is that one of the real challenges is the notion of efficient. I'm a theoretician originally, so I have my Turing machine in my back pocket. Got a problem, I'll pull it out, I'll solve it for you. I'll solve anything that's solvable. But that doesn't really work well in the real world in terms of getting things done. So the fact that we have a fair amount of theory about what's provable and various strategies for dealing with undecidability, for dealing with intractability, at the end of the day, it really is about efficiency. People want something that's economical as well as effective in the challenge that they're trying to address. So what I'll talk about here is I'll give a quick overview of IEEE, because I think it's important to just have a perspective of what IEEE brings to the table. I'll talk about last year's project, main project that we initiated, the Center for Secure Design, that I know many of you, myself included, were surprised when we first saw it back in August. I'll talk about this year's main project, the Tri-simsie platform, and then a number of collaborations that we've got ongoing in this initiative. So how many of you are members of IEEE or Computer Society or have been? Okay, good, so about half of you. I encourage you to join. It's a worthwhile long-term investment. You don't always know every day what the value is, but in the long run, I think it pays off well. So IEEE is a big organization, 430,000 members, spans the globe, tends to be Western heavy. 45% are in 45% of members are in North America, but very strong European participation and growing participation in the developing countries. China's an untapped area that they're certainly looking for. But lots of conferences, lots of technical periodicals. I mean, typical of what you would expect in a professional society. Somewhat unique for IEEE as a professional society is the amount of standards work that is done by IEEE, so 802.11, et cetera. They work with ISO, ITU, and others. One thing that recently the World Trade Organization recognized them, as well as I think there was a constellation of standards organizations that they recognized through the Open Stand project, and IEEE, IETF, I believe was one. I can't remember the others that they cited. But clearly, IEEE as a professional society distinguishes itself in terms of its standards, work. Specifically on security and privacy, there's a number of conferences that I'm sure many here have published in, especially the Oakland conference there, the one that's held in Silicon Valley every May. And the new emerging one, the next one, the conference on communications and network security, fairly new conference, but it's already seeing acceptance rates competitive with Oakland. Publications, again, many of you are aware of Security and Privacy magazine, contribute to that, but publish in, there's a number of other venues there. And then again, the standards, the more security-centric standards that IEEE is active in. So this serves as a good foundation to build an initiative on. The IEEE periodically looks out and every year tries to stand up 2 or 3 new initiatives to address emerging technologies typically. Security and privacy is not a new technology, obviously, but they recognize that there's an opportunity for IEEE to play a bigger role in those. So they've started this multi-year initiative, typically lasts 3 to 5 years. So what's the goal? Well, I've already stated what that is. And we have these 3 primary activities. I joined as chair of this just back in October, and things were just kind of getting started last year. So we're really at the beginning of the initiative. It's expected to go at least another 3 years. The more successes we can show, the more resources IEEE will put into this. IEEE is putting hundreds of thousands of dollars of their own funding into this. So it's a well-funded effort in terms of providing venues and workshops and facilitating the various projects that we come up with here. Not really a form of support externally, but it certainly brings to bear a large IEEE corporate organization. Just briefly, a key thing from my point of view is having a good group of advisors. So I reached out to a number of IEEE fellows and asked them to serve on the steering committee. And then on the right there are a number of colleagues that I've interacted with over the years that bring a diverse set of skills. On the bottom right there is Kathy Clark-Fisher. She's the IEEE employee who supports this as the initiative director. Many of you may know her from her 10 years as managing editor of the Security and Privacy magazine. So she understands the community, she knows the players, and she knows the resources of IEEE to help the rest of us who are all volunteers work on this initiative. So what have we been up to? This was the first project, and this was really the brainchild of Gary McGraw that I know many of you know, as well as Carl Landwehr, the Center for Secure Design, and really trying to start looking at the design process as it affects security and privacy. And so I'll go into some detail. One of the key aspects here is they've brought together a diverse set of corporate players to be involved to help figure out what the key flaws are and have their operational perspective inform this, as opposed to just an academic exercise or end users complaining about the software that doesn't work. Part of what they did in terms of trying to understand what the flaws are was to analyze things like OWASP to figure out what are what are the vulnerabilities that keep on recurring? And so, here you can kind of see where, lots of vulnerabilities really don't go away in terms of a class of vulnerabilities. And so it begs the question of, why do these keep recurring? Obviously, oops, where'd that slide go? Yeah. Knowing about these issues is not avoiding them. So, we've got this set of consistent recurring activities for over a decade. That's typically within the development life cycle, if you will, of new software, new techniques to get out there and get deployed. So, obviously the ecosystem of software engineering is not learning, not incorporating these ideas, in part because it may be too difficult to address them. So anyhow, we wanted to look at, how can we recast these recurring flaws? And what they did was they came up with a top 10 list, similar to what has been done in vulnerabilities and exploits in terms of what seems to create the most problem. So this was, unscientific in the sense of it was a bunch of experts sitting around the table, coming up with this top 10 list. But it provides a starting point then to analyze the problem further. And I'll have links here at the end that you can refer to. Use cryptography correctly. One would like to think that's easy, but it's actually a lot harder than the software packages would like you to know. Always consider the users. Obviously, something that is not done often enough. But so anyhow, these 10 are not no surprise to this audience and stuff that we've been working on. But it's again trying to bring this material together so that the broader community of developers who aren't security and privacy experts can use these as they try and build systems. So the list of authors there, back in August, they published a report that's online and available. They're creating a Spanish version of that. It got some very nice press in terms of, okay, this is a step in the right direction, but clearly it's not the answer yet. Follow-up work on that is going to be on domain specific. Looking at tools, what are the actual things that you can do to mitigate some of these flaws, as opposed to just saying, here's a design flaw, do better. As technologists, we owe the community, we owe society something more than just an admonition to do better. And then consider some of the specific domains. I believe they want to delve down into automotive and medical at least, but try and instantiate things further at a domain-specific level, because the flaws that matter the most and the flaws that are being seen in those domains may vary. And then consider privacy. Clearly, at the President's Summit earlier this month, privacy was a key concern. And I think for most people, your fellow citizens, lay engineers, security and privacy are kind of the same in terms of there's a threat. You want to protect against it. What are the technical tools available to manage that threat? So the second big project, and this is the one that I've been promoting and driving forward, is based on this kind of experience that I think many of us have had. You read about some cool new technology. You can take your latest favorite CyLab talk where some new idea was presented, and you hear about it, and it's it's complicated, and it's got technical aspects, and there's methods, and there's some fun math in it, and you want to know about more than just reading the paper, because there's usually software behind it. There's some exemplar, demonstration, analysis, what have you. You try and use the technology. So you go to GitHub or wherever the software happens to be, you download it, you try and reproduce the results, you try and run the demo. Maybe you watch the video, though video doesn't really give you an interactive play to it. And have you had it fail? Device compatibility, operating system verities, package revisions, and so on. can make it difficult, especially when you start using security and privacy technologies that might be accessing lower levels of the operating system or making assumptions about the networking environment. So, the goal here then is to take those confounds, take those challenges that are broadly being experienced in the science community, in terms of archiving, curating, and presenting technical artifacts, where technical artifact is more than just the paper, it's the code, it's the data, it's the result. So that's a broad effort within the science and research community. But what we want to add to that is the notion of an experience of those artifacts. So actually being able to run the code, if you've got a fuzzing tool, for example, have a meaningful experience of that fuzzing tool where you could maybe even potentially put in your own code and see, okay, for this little snippet of code, here's how it fuzzes. Here's the sort of result that fuzzing might produce. So let me go to a demo. The reason why I'm taking this approach is because it turns out that there's already an instance of what I'm talking about available out there in a demonstration. So Lab 41 is a In-Q-Tel subsidiary or In-Q-Tel effort. They've got this up and running. I'm going to go to the demo in just a minute. It's in GitHub, so it's open source. And let me just pop out of this real quick. So if you go to lab41.org website, they talk about their work. If you click through a couple places, you get to this, where essentially what you have is a web interface that's now going to take you to some virtualized containers to demonstrate different technologies that they have. These particular technologies are focused around big data. But, again, my goal is to stand up something like this for security and privacy technologies. The only one I've really been able to have luck getting running has been the graphs one. And so, let's see, that's Dendrite. And the cool thing about this is let's see, where is it here? No, go away. It's always hard looking at this. Let's get to where I want to go. No, sorry. Thought I had navigated there before we all came in here. There we go. Kind of hide it down there. There we go. Tri41.org. That. Oh, try now. There it is. There's the try now button. So you try now. Oh, crap. Okay. They've got a little bit of problem with their timeout because I did this at 9 o'clock this morning and it obviously hasn't timed out yet. But what it does is it creates there's a container standing ready in the Docker and OpenStack environment that's ready to replicate and be instantiated as a user comes in to use the technology. I'm going to try restarting the browser, see if it will. Crap. Okay. Yeah. So much for the live demo. But the Dendrite one is the one that I've actually been able to do successfully. So if you go to the website, what you'll come up with is, let's see. It's not great when I lose the mouse either. There we go. When you get this image of the graph, you'll be able to manipulate the graph. And it's not particularly complicated. You can move the nodes around. You can collapse and expand nodes. So it's fairly simple. But on the back end, there's a container that's driving the computation of essentially it's a spring-loaded mapping that's going on. And so you get you can potentially use a computationally intensive activity on the back end to create a web experience on the front end. So let's go back to the presentation here. Apologize that the demo didn't work out. It's like if I do it, the first time I do it every day, it works fine. If I try and do it again later on in the day, it seems to glitch on me. So it's not great software yet, So that's, part of the challenge in trying to stand up something like this. But we have access to the developers, and they've indicated willingness to advise and cooperate with us. I wanted to get Lab 41 to actually run the project for us, but they said it was outside their scope of their mission. So the objectives is to get the platform up and ready in some cloud, talking to a number of partners about who might provide a cloud, or we might rent time, say on Amazon or Azure, or one of the public clouds. Want to get 12 experiences. So when I say an experience, I mean a container. Ideally, the source code for the container, the stuff that's in the container, is in GitHub, so that people can have access to it. But one of the interesting things about this approach is one might be able to put proprietary information into the container, because the user just has the interface and doesn't have access to the actual contents of the container. Yes?
Rather than having their own VM. When you're talking about low-level security stuff, you had said before that some of the challenges are when you have something operating that's really low level the operating system, it's hard to replicate. Does this potentially have problems with working in the kernel layer, and that's a shared kernel, and now it's not going to have the response that you would expect in a container that's created in a isolated machine?
Exactly. I mean, you could have those eventualities. The good thing is Dan Gear was part of the security review team for this. Now, yeah, for the applications that they're doing in big data, they're not poking at the low level. But then the question is, if you throw some virtualization on top of a container, then you could potentially deal with it that way. But that's part of what we want to explore, about what are the ways that you can actually instantiate an experience of a security technology in a meaningful way to see that. I think, at least from like a fuzzing level point of view, because you're not reaching down, you could do that. And even a buffer overflow, again, you can stay at the user level safely. So the goal is to get 12 containers available, to have 1,000 completed user experiences. So what I just did there, I would not call a completed user experience. It's that someone can really get to the end, and the way I would test that in terms of a valid way is a little survey comes back up and says if they click yes that they completed it, then that gets counted as a completed user survey. So they really have to get to the end. They have to acknowledge that they got something meaningful out of it. And then, so these are just 3 ideas there. It's not meant to be a plan per se. It's just meant to give you an idea of the sort of things I believe that we could or should do with a platform like this. So demonstrating fuzzing techniques. The one I like about that is that you could potentially put little code snippets of your own in there. With these containers, you can manage the amount of resources that they actually have access to in terms of space and time. They can also stand up virtualized interactions. I mean, if they need more computing resources, they can draw upon those in order to give a timely experience. Examples of buffer overflow. I continue to be amazed that it's difficult. I'm often in situations where I'm trying to explain to a policymaker or to their staff who may have an engineering degree. Here's what a buffer overflow is, and here's why it's so easy to do, and here's why it causes a problem. And if they don't have a coding background, and even if they do, it's hard to really clearly demonstrate, quickly what's going on there, and let them, kind of experience that themselves. I think being able to show, say NetFlow or packet dump data that's happening in a virtualized network, to demonstrate the value or challenges of the new HCSD protocol, again, that would be an effective way potentially to educate engineers. The goal here is, not only to facilitate the R&D community, but to help the R&D community that's focused on security and privacy, but also the engineers that aren't focused on security and privacy in their day in and day out jobs. They've got to write code. My son writes apps for a environmental engineering company. And it's about managing water resources and water treatment plants in a particular town. So it'd be nice if he could learn something about security in a meaningful way, so that he could apply those concepts into his environment. One of the interesting comments made at the NIST workshop that was just before the summit 2 weeks ago was most software developers really aren't any different than consumers. They make poor choices when it comes to security and privacy. They don't appreciate the threat models that may be out there, and arguably they should necessarily. But at the very least, we need to be able to give them tools that they can understand that are easy to use and effective. And so the idea behind this is you could think of it as an education environment to some extent. The way Lab 41 is using it, it's more of a collaboration environment. So people can put up ideas, they can share them quickly, give an experience to their colleagues. Then if their colleagues like it, they can go to GitHub and download the code and use them in their own environments. Apologize, I haven't been pausing for questions. Are there any questions so far? Any other questions, I should say?
Another question.
Yes, David.
It seems like there's almost two motivations here, and I'm wondering if you have a feeling for which one is more important. One is to expose people to concepts like how does fuzzy work, but then there was also the reproducibility of research, exactly. So those are quite different.
Yeah, well, I think it's the reproducibility of the experience in the sense of you say, when I do X, I get Y. And how do you make sure that someone can go in there and believe that, either because, if I say buffer overflow is a problem to an engineer and they can't reproduce that experience as they're trying to maybe mitigate that, it's the same, in my mind, it's some of the same issue as a researcher reads a paper, there's a claim made, there's the data in the code, and they can't reproduce the analytic result that's there.
The reason I'm asking is there's a lot of, there's a question on how much education we have on this. Like the buffer overflows, we have PicoCPF where people can go and solve buffer overflows all the way up to exploding QA, so we have a web-based viewer and all this sort of thing. But it seems like a little bit different to you. CybSI.
Yeah, well, and
trying to put that in my mind.
and that's part of I've got an ask coming up here of people joining the team, because so far I've been the one that's been driving and defining it, and as many of you know, I don't know the details of, say, Docker and OpenStack, so I've been treading on thin ice at times as I try and push this forward. Part of it is in the context of IEEE. We all know that publication platforms are decaying for professional societies. And so this is, potentially another way for them to publish, results as part of their enterprise.
Because there's the second set of efforts where, like, if you go to PLDI, there's this whole reproducible data set thing.
Yep.
Recent. And you could see someone like IEEE and even NSF, I guess, encourages this, trying to come up with, not in all cases, obviously, but at least in some cases where people want to submit this information.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and and at the steering committee talked about this, about, some people wanted to maybe make it a prior requirement of submitting a paper, and it's like, yeah, it's not that baked yet. But certainly post hoc, one could say, okay, there's a paper accepted, and then here's, the richer experience of that. Because I'd like to think that what this does is it drives people to a technology because they can have a meaningful experience compared to the other technologies where they've got to read the paper and try and understand. So it's kind of a differentiator in terms of the understandability of a technology, understandability of an idea, is part of where I'm trying to go. So, yeah, I don't know the specifics of the Pico environment and what you guys have up there.
I was just trying to get, like, giving people a security experience, and then there's reproducibility of research results, which is quite different.
Yes.
As far as field and requirements, like if you're writing a paper, you're basically agreeing to publish, but as soon as you start giving people code to run and things like this, it's a whole different ballgame, from IP to liability to this, that, and the other.
Well, I read Stoddard, some of her comments on the OSTP RFI that was out on reproducibility, and clearly making everybody's, it talked about part of what she was encouraging, what the community was encouraging, is making code, requirement as part of doing research. You got to make the code available, but the lawyers at your favorite university really aren't going to buy into that because there's too much funding there.
It's also the PIs. The PIs have potentially a vested interest.
Yes.
Just like, the professors here who have patents that make development.
Yeah.
Why give that away?
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think what's interesting here is that you could containerize that and potentially protect that,
Well,
or give a limited experience of it.
making it a requirement, I think, is off limits.
Yeah.
But certainly encouraging people and maybe even giving an incentive.
Yeah.
If IEEE could, like, it increases the accept, they'll have some amount of acceptances where people publish their results in their top conferences would be very alluring to many people.
Yeah. So first I figure we got to build it so they can at least experience it. One of the other ideas that's come up is to start a letters of research in cybersecurity, kind of the more traditional, 4-page sort of thing. So the 4 pages would be used to document, say, a submission here, or to have an annual award of, what's the coolest experience that researchers, and that way you don't have to get bound into the particulars of a conference. You could just say in the IEEE enterprise of security and privacy conferences. Yeah, I do too. Yeah. So anyhow, that's. Any other questions? Yes.
So when you're talking about privacy and security and our society and where it's going and all, a lot of our liberties require privacy, anonymity as well. Mm-hmm. And then you look at, like, my mail was moved to Google Mail, and they don't even have an interface to do encrypted email in their system. And even if they did, they'd still be able to mine all of the headers and the envelope headers. Is there any work on getting significantly improved privacy and anonymity on services like what Google has? And like when the news came out that the FISA court was giving companies orders saying you have to give us a backdoor into your unencrypted data, but you have to continue telling your customers there is no such thing. Is there any work going on to get the solution to having the privacy, having the safety, having the anonymity?
The answer is absolutely yes. There's actually a couple of projects going on in IEEE. One I'll come to at the end here. It's called the Internet Initiative, and the notion of governance and security and privacy issues around that is part of that. There's also IEEE USA, which is a lobbying organization. So if you're a member of IEEE in the US, part of your fees go to support IEEE USA that lobbies Congress. And there's people involved from the privacy community, like Gene Camp is involved, helping to establish policy papers. And they came out with a policy paper saying, yeah, backdoors are, so the thing that you're talking about is a bad idea. That it just, the threat, it's a, the threat model has a heyday if that's really what you're going to enable. So the point of view that I'm taking with this is the goal of the initiative is to, as technologists, be able to provide society with more options and be able to clearly demonstrate what those options are. So, to your example of the challenge of encrypting email through a cloud environment is, to have a demonstration and say, look, if you put something in a cloud, here's what you can still see as part of that. And being able to, so you can write a paper about that, or you can have a demonstration so that, a layperson, especially a policymaker, could go in and say, oh, on my Gmail, here's, or whatever cloud-based environment I'm using, even if I encrypt the content, here's still the metadata that's still visible, and be able to do a demonstration of that. And that's part of educating society about what the real trade-offs are as they try to make decisions. As engineers, the best we can do is, here's the trade space, here's your options, and then as society, as citizens of society, we can participate in the conversation. But I think as engineers, our goal is to provide options and provide informed knowledge about what those trade-offs are. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. It's a start. Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. I mean, I think it's because what's interesting is if you go to other countries, they have very different senses of what the trade-offs are. You know, and just even something, you know, as simple as the notion of threat and threat model, adversary. You know, different countries treat that very differently. And, you know, things that we see as not threats, they would see as total threats. See that things that we see as threats, they don't care so much about. So I think that's part of the other challenge when it comes to the broader issue of internet governance. You know, what's everybody's definition of security and privacy isn't particularly consistent. Any other questions? I got a slide that, yeah, it kind of looks like I know what I'm doing, so we'll leave it at that. Looking for volunteers individually. You know, we've got to stand this up. Still working on the details. Talking to David here about what role CyLab might play. Got a defense contractor that's interested in producing, in supporting a, providing a platform. So that'd be very exciting. Really, I'm trying to figure out how to make the CyLab, or not the CyLab, the initiative resources for my IEEE go as far as I can. So the less I have to spend on developer time, the less I have to spend on cloud expenses, the more we can spend on awards and workshops and such for this. Institutionally, looking for a compute platform and then resources to design, develop, operate, support. Got it a mailing list there. I think these slides will be tied up on the website. But Tri-simsie at seicmu.edu. So I just want to mention some collaborations that we're doing. This is a workshop that Carl Landwehr drove along with Tom Haig. This is NSF's co-sponsored. This was last October. Building code, you know, it's essentially having a deeper discussion relative to medical devices on his building codes for building code idea. I think it just came out in, did I just say it in ACM last week? It was published there. But he's got a nice, they've got a nice 20-page report on the outcome of that conference. And I know a number of people here, like Sam Weber and Rob Secord were there. There's a DIMEX workshop. This is something that I've been driving. It will be here at Carnegie Mellon, June 12th to 10th to the 12th. And it's really about how can efficiency provide protection in algorithms. And it kind of, you know, where my inspiration from this came from was in fuzzing. You know, if you fuzz for a while and you find a bunch of bugs and you fix them, does that make it harder for future fuzzing to find new bugs that are exploitable? Or you could think of it from a undecidable theorem proving problem, you know, much like the work that David's in, where you're searching for a counterexample. You spend a lot of compute energy. You don't find a counterexample. Have you now, do you have any sort of guarantee or any sort of knowledge about how much effort your adversary would have to take to find a counterexample, because you've already spent so much time looking yourself? But yeah, working with that with Carl Roloff, who is an expert in homomorphic encryption, and Conrad Vesey, he just left IARPA as a PM. He ran the Stone Soup and one of the other homomorphic encryption focused program there. Dogstool just got contacted by Michael Wadner about doing some challenge workshops with them. That could be very exciting. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dogstool, but these are German-sponsored workshops that have been going on for a long time in technology. They put you up in a very posh castle, feed you good food, leave you alone for a week, and you come out with good ideas and write a report. So interesting. I mean, given the European impact there, that's a neat opportunity. And then 3i, this is one that I alluded to earlier. This is a broader IEEE effort to get more involved with where the internet's going. I guess they decided it's a big thing, so they're still trying to get their head around what they want to do, but it's really about getting involved in governance issues and helping to drive the security, the policy conversations around security and privacy, especially at an international level. And tentatively, at least, they've got a workshop scheduled coincident with Oakland in May out in California. but I don't think I've got the website there, but they haven't, I think, officially announced it yet because some of the details are still up in the air. And further information. So with that, are there any other questions? Really, yes.
Greg, any consideration of integration with cyber physical systems?
Good question. I've kind of, one way to deal with that is, well, can you be more specific? You mean in terms of the Tri-simsie stuff? Yeah. So one is, if you have a model of a cyber physical system, then you could demonstrate various ideas. You know, if you want to connect it to a real physical device, then you've got to have a physical location and have a physical tap. But that's not out of the question. I mean, the Step Forward platform has shown that you can do that.
Exactly.
I mean, that's one reason to have it be a private cloud as opposed to a public cloud, because then you can more readily have those taps and get at the high fidelity information that you're really looking for there. But I've contemplated it, but we've got to crawl before we walk here. Any other questions? Okay. Well, that's all I have for you, and I hope that if you're interested, you'll contact me. Thanks.